Welcome to the complete HTML and CSS master course, where we build a professional landing page, which is the Upwork.com landing page. In this video, we are going to finish up the project by building the footer components. Then we look at the responsive. If this is your first time joining this playlist, hey, don't click away. Below, you will find a link to the previous video and also a link to the complete project. Without wasting our time, let's jump in. Welcome back. And in this session, we are going to build the footer. Without wasting any time, let's go straight and see how we can achieve this. Now, let's start by looking at the current structure of our HTML document. So we have this main and also we have the footer. We are simply going to do everything about this footer inside this particular place, okay? So here we can simply add a container with a class of footer container. So let's look at what we have. Now, if you look at the finished project, okay, we have this particular section, which we are simply going to call the footer main. That is the main part of our footer. Now, this part, we are going to call it the middle, and this is going to be the end part, okay, the final part of our footer. That means we are going to have three major containers. Okay. Now, for the first one, we use a div with a class of footer main. Here, let's add a div with a class of footer main list. Now, let's add h6. And for the first one, let's simply write for clients. And after this first one, we use an unordered list. Here we have our li. Then let's use an anchor tag. For now, let's have this hash. And this should be out to higher. And we are going to repeat this several times, okay? Option, shift, and arrow down. So what we are going to do here is to simply copy all these tests. So talent marketplace, you copy all these tests one after the other. You put that here. You copy the second one. You do the same thing for the remaining ones. Now we are done with this part. If you look at this, and this, you see that they are almost the same thing. So without wasting our time, all we need to do now is to copy this particular part. So this div, footer main list, we simply copy this, okay, paste it here, and paste it again. And all we need to do, so this is the first one for clients. Now let's go to the second one, which is going to be for talent, and the third one is going to be this, and the fourth one is going to be this. Copy everything, okay? Just change the text, and when you are done, we continue. Now we have for clients, and we have the list. Then for talent, we have this. Then resources, we have this. And finally, company, we have this. Good. Okay, so let's close this part, which is the footer main. Next, let's add a div with a class of footer middle, okay? And for this footer mid, which is this, is simply going to be divided into two. This is the first part, and this is the second part, okay? So let's say div with a class of footer mid left, as simple as that. And let's add our h6. Here we say follow us. Then after this h6, let's add a div with a class of footer mid left icon. And now let's add a div with a class of footer icon. In here, we can now add our image. So let's go to the assets, go to the SVG, and let's use LinkedIn. And here we can simply say LinkedIn icon. So we can now copy this div, okay, this particular footer icon div, and repeat it several times. So let's change the second one. Okay, so the first one is supposed to be this, should be Facebook. The second one is LinkedIn. The third one is simply Twitter. And the fifth one is Instagram. Now we can close this div, the footer mid left. Let's add the second div, and we're going to call this the footer mid right. And let's add our H6. Here we say mobile app. And now let's add a div with a class of footer mid right items, and also a div with a class of footer icon. And in here, we simply add an image. And for this, let's go to our asset SVG. And here we use the Apple SVG. Here, let's say Apple icon. Now we can repeat this, change this here to Android, and this should be Android. Now, before we continue, let's go back here. The first one should be Facebook icon. Okay, change this to LinkedIn, this to Twitter, and do the same thing for the rest. Also, remember that all these SVG icon, let's add our general style, which we use the icon IMG. So we can simply copy this, put it here, 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 here. Okay. So now we also have the footer mid. Finally, let's add a div with a class of footer end. Okay. So here, let's add a paragraph, and we can simply copy this text. Okay. Next, let's add an unordered list. And for this unordered list, let's give it a class of footer last list. And in here, we have, let's generate 5 LIs. So we can use this shortcut. Just type LI *5, hit tab. Now you can copy all these text. Perfect. Great. Now let's see what we have. Good. Now we have this. Great. Good. Now let's use CSS to actually turn this to now become this. Okay. Let's go and see that in action. So right here in our style sheet, let's add a comment, and let's call this footer. First, let's grab the footer element. Let's change the background color. So we are going to use our main text color. So let's use color main text. Okay. Let's change the text color to white. Good. By default, anchor elements have a different behavior actually from every other element. Now, if you look at what we did here, we actually set the color of every text in this footer to white. But for the anchor links, okay, for the anchor element, you see that this style is not actually applied. So we have to specifically select the anchor tag itself. So let's do that. We say footer, select the anchor element there, and let's change the color white. Okay, and now you see everything worked. Now let's continue with this footer. Let's add some padding. So let's say 1 rem top, 6 rem left and right, and 4.5 rem bottom. Let's add some margin top of 4.4 rem, and let's add border radius of 8 pixels. So now we have this. This is the border radius here, 8 pixels. Now let's continue. Let's type the footer main. So let's display flex. Let's justify content to be spaced between. So now we have this. Let's align items, and let's add margin bottom of, let's say, 5.2 rem. Okay. Now let's grab the footer main list. Let's display flex. So we change the flex direction. Okay. So let's change the flex direction to colon, and let's add some gap. Let's use 1.2 rem. Okay. Now let's tie the H6. Okay. The H6 inside this footer main list. Let's increase the font size. So let's set that to 1 rem. Let's change the font width. Let's use 400. And let's change the color to, let's use our gray 100. Let's tie the UL inside the main list. Let's set display to flex. Let's change the flex direction, column. Let's give it some gap of 1 rem. Let's change the font size to 0.9 rem, and let's change the color, our gray color. So let's use gray 100. Now we have this. Now let's tie the footer mid. And for this footer mid, first let's look at the page. Now, if you look at the icon, we want to see how we can actually change the color of this icon. And to do that, let's go back here. Let's select this class. No, this should be footer dash icon. Please correct this. Okay, so what we do is we select this particular class and we want to style the image, okay, the image inside it. And to do this, let's use the filter. We are going to use this filter to actually apply visual effects like blurring, the color shifting, brightness on these particular icons, okay? And let's see how we are going to do that. First, we are going to start by using some of the filter. This filter property has different function. And the first one we are going to use is what we call the invert, okay? The invert. And this actually inverts the colors of the element. So it's going to invert the colors of this particular image, okay? And this takes a percentage value. So here, let's say 98%. Next, let's add what we call the sepia. And this applies a sepia tone to the element. This also takes a percentage value where 100% fully applies the sepia effect. Okay. In our case, let's use 10%. The next one, let's use the U rotate. The U rotate is simply going to rotate the hue of the element color. Okay. So it takes a value between 0 to 360 degrees. So in our case, let's simply use 9 degree. And next, let's add the brightness. And we use this to actually adjust the brightness of an element. In our case, let's use 102%. So by default, the value of this brightness is 100%. Okay, that's the default value. But anything below 100 actually darkens the element. But values above 100 brightens the element. Okay. So the next one is the contrast. And that's the last one we are going to use in our case. And let's set the contrast to 102%. Okay. And now you see we have this. Now, what happens if we actually change this? For instance, let's set it to 10%. You see, extremely dark. Now, increase it to 98%. You see? Okay. Now, let's increase it to 30%. Okay. So you can use this actually to adjust the color you want. But in our case, let's set it to, we can even leave it at 100. So now back in this footer mid, let's add display, flex, okay? Let's justify content to be spaced between. Remember, this is a class, so there should be dots here, okay? And now we have this part, which is the right part, and this is the left part, because we used justify content space between, okay? Let's align items to the center. Now let's add border bottom. Okay, so let's use one piece use solid, and let's use our white color. So this should be color white. Perfect. Now let's add some space here, and we do that using padding. So let's say padding bottom, and let's set that to 1 rem. Great. Now let's tie the footer mid left. Let's display flex. Let's align items to the center, and let's give it a gap of 1 rem. We also want the same behavior here. So what we can do is to select both. So here we use comma dot footer mid right. Okay, so now we have the same thing. Now let's tie the HCs inside this. Okay, let's change the font size to 0.9 rem. Let's also do the same thing for the HCs inside this. So here we can use comma and HCs. Okay, so now we have this. Good. Let's select these icons, footer mid left icons, and also footer mid right icons. So let's change this to right. Let's set display to flex. Let's check the selector here. Footer mid right icons. Let's see what we have here. Footer mid right items. Okay, so this should be items. Good. Let's add a gap of 1 rem. Okay, and let's align items to the center. Great. Now let's undo the final part. Great. Now let's look at these icons. Okay, because in the finished project, this is what we have. So let's see how we can achieve that. It's very simple. All we need to do is to select the icon, so footer icon. Let's change the width. Let's use 2.5 rem. Also the height, 2.5 rem. Let's display. Okay. Now let's add border. Let's say 1 pieces solid. So let's use gray 100. Good. Let's make this rectangle. Let's change it to a circle. And we do that by simply using the border radius, and we set this to 50%, and that will give us what we want. Good. Now we need these icons to be at the center of this circle. And to do that is very simple. We can simply use our CSS flex pose. So display flex. Let's justify content to the center. You see, and next, let's align items vertically to the center. So justify content, we did that horizontally, and now vertically, we align everything to the center. Perfect. And this is exactly what we want. Finally, let's go to the last part. Okay. So let's select the footer end. And first, let's set padding top to 1 rem. So we can have equal space here and here. Okay. Next, display flex. Let's justify content to flex start. Let's add some gap of 4 rem. Let's align items to the center. And let's change the font size to 0.9 rem. Good. Now, let's select the footer last list. Let's display, which is this part. Okay. Flex. Let's align items to the center. And finally, we just add gap. Okay. So let's say gap of 1 rem. As simple as this. Very simple, right? And this is very, very amazing. You see how we splitted this project into components by components, building everything step by step. And you see, we achieved this. In this part, we are going to look at what we call responsive design. But before we do that, let's look at our own project. Okay, this is what we have currently. But in the finished project, you actually see this favicon icon here. On us, we only have this particular default icon. Okay, so let's see how we can actually add this icon right here. To achieve this, we'll actually do that in the head part. So in our HTML document, we have this head part. This is our body, and this is the head part. Just before our style sheet, that is before this link, okay, which is meant for our style sheet. For this, we're going to use the link tag, which is actually a self-closing tag, as we already know by now. And remember that I told you that the link actually accepts attributes, which the two main important ones are the rel and also the href. Okay. Now for this rel, we are going to specify icon. And for the href, let's use the favicon icon under our assets. Okay. And if you save this file, now you have this. Okay. Do you see? We now have this particular icon here. Great. The next thing we are going to do now is to move straight to responsive design. Now, on this web page, you can actually right click on this and you will see this inspect. Or if you're Mac, you can simply press Command Option J, and this will take you to the developer tools. Now, click on these elements. For now, the important thing we want to do here is actually this particular icon here. So you can click on this. So this will give us access to view our website on different devices. For instance, on, let's say, iPhone SE, you see how our website is going to look like, which is not exactly what we want. Okay. If you look at the finished project, now, if you do the same thing here on the finished project, you see, this is what we have. Okay. You see this. And when you click on this, you have this. Okay. So we can toggle on and off. Let's see how we can actually achieve this here. Okay. So in our HTML file, inside this header, we have this main logo container. Okay. Main logo container. Right after this main logo container, let's add another div. And let's give this class of menu toggle. And let's also give this an ID. an ID of menu toggle. Okay. So inside this div, let's use our image and we can go to our assets. Let's go to SVG and here we can see the burger icon. So let's give this for the auth, let's specify menu icon, and let's give this a class of menu toggle. After this div, let's add another div with a class of close menu. And also let's add an ID. Here, let's add our IMG. So we go to our assets. Let's go to the SVG and we're going to use the times icon. So here, let's just say close icon. Pay good attention to the structure of our document. Okay. So inside this div, that is a div with this class main logo container, we now have this IMG, which is for the logo. Now we have another one for this menu, okay, the menu toggle. Then we have another one that is this particular div wrapping the close menu. Okay, just pay attention to this. The first thing we are going to do is to grab this particular container, then we go back to our styles. Okay, inside the header section, let's actually add this class, which is the container containing these icons and also our Upwork logo. Okay, so what we do here is to set this to a flex container. So we say display flex. Okay, so we now have these three here. All right, what we can do is to align items to the center. And now let's give them gap. Let's use one rem. The next thing we are going to do, by default, we need to hide this particular menu and also the close menu. Okay, let's select the menu toggle. We can also select using ID. Okay, if you go back here, for this, we gave a class of menu toggle and also an ID of menu toggle. Now, to select by ID, we use hash. Okay, so we use this hash and let's select the close toggle by the ID. Okay, what we want to do first, let's change the cursor to pointer. The next thing we want to do is to change the position of these items. Look at our HTML. In this file, you see that we have this Upwork logo first. That's why you see that this logo comes before the icons. But we want the icon. So in the finished project, you see that we have the icon before this logo. Okay, so let's actually do that. So we can use CSS to achieve that using the CSS order property. So what we do, we set the order to a number that is less than that of this Upwork logo. By default, the order of this Upwork logo is greater than negative number. Okay, we can just simply use -1. Okay, and you see that now we have this menu. Let's see why this is not working. Okay, close toggle. Let's see what the ID is. So we used close menu, not toggle. So let's change this to menu. All right, perfect. Now, by default, we want to hide those icons. So display should be set to none. Okay, great. Next, we are going to use media query to actually achieve the behavior we want. Okay, basically, we are going to assess the size of different devices. To use media query, we use at media. Okay, at media, and let's use the simplest form. Here we are going to specify a size. Okay, let's say mass width of, for now, let's say 1024 pixels. Now, what this block does is that whatsoever style we add here is going to be applied to any device that has width less than or equal to 1024 pixels, that is 1024 downward. Now, all we need to do is to do the same thing we've been doing here. Okay, the same thing we've been doing in our CSS file. You simply grab whatsoever you want to style. For instance, if we want to apply background color on the body element, we simply select the body element and we say background color, okay, should be, for example, let's say green, and save this file. Come here, right click on this and open this inspect. Now look at what happens when we get to 1024. You see 1026, the background is not green. 101192, you see the background is not green. But once we get to 1024 below, everything is green. Do you understand this? So whatsoever thing we do here is going to be applied to devices with width of 1024 pixels downward, okay, 1024 below. So here we say at mass, okay, mass width should be 1024 pixels. Okay, we also have what we call the mean width. Okay, we also have mean width. That means this style is going to be applied to devices from 1024 upward. Okay, you see the difference between the mean width and the mass width. So for now, let's stick to mass width. So let's move this to 1024 below. Okay, all right. And here, let's add a comment. So let's just say responsive styles. On this device, if you go to the finished project, let's view this. You see that on this particular screen, the subnav is no longer present. So you see that here we have to hide this subnav. To do that, we simply select the grouped input. Okay. We also select the subnav and we set display to none. Now you see we don't have the subnav and also the input field is gone. Great. The next thing we want to do is to display the menu toggle. Okay, so on this screen, we want to see the menu toggle. To do that, we simply set display to flex. Great. Now let's change the size of this menu toggle. Let's select the menu toggle and also the close menu. Let's change the width to 32 pixels and also the height to 32 pixels. Now let's grab the header nav and let's change the flex direction to colon. The header nav, remember we already styled this initially. So let's search for this. You can press Command F, okay? So let's remove this and let me show you this. You highlight this and you press Command F on Mac, and on Windows, I think that should be Control F, which is to find, okay? Now let's see the first place we actually selected this. We set it to a flex container, and by default, the flex direction is gonna be row, okay? So we are changing the flex direction from row to column on this particular screen size, okay? And let's align items. So align items should be flex start. Now look at it, it is at the center. Why? Because here we align items to the center. So let's change that on this particular screen. If you save it now, you see, okay, this is the flex start. Let's now select the header left container. Okay, this header left container. Let's also do the same thing. We change the flex direction to colon. Let's align items to be flex stats. Okay, and let's change the width to 100%. One thing we can do for now, let's grab the header itself. On this particular screen, let's set the height to 100 viewport height. Later we can remove that, but let's create this space in order to understand what we are doing. Okay, now let's select the list header left. We also change the flex direction to colon. Okay, so now we have this. Let's align items to flex start. Let's give it a gap of 4 rem and let's increase the weight and let's set the width to 100%. Now let's select each of the list items. So that will be the list item header left. Let's give it a padding right of 1 rem. Let's set display to flex. Basically, we want to push this icon to this particular side, okay? And let's justify content space between. Let's set the width to 100%. And now let's set display to flex because we want to push this particular icon, the drop down icon, to this side while the text remains in this side, just as we have it in the finished project. Okay, so we use justify content space between. Okay, so now we have this. Let's tie the buttons. So dot header action buttons. Let's change the flex direction to column and let's align items to flex start. Now let's tie the btn login. Okay, so the btn login is inside this container dot btn login. Let's set margin top to 3 rem. Perfect. Let's remove the padding left. Let's set that to 0. Okay, now let's tie the button inside this class, the button itself. Let's set margin left to 1 rem. Now for this sign up, we gave it a class of btn header sign up. So let's grab that class. We want to increase the width. Let's set the width to 100%. Let's tie the container wrapping this sign up, which is this here. So btn sign up container. Let's actually style that first. Let's set the width to 100%. Let's position it absolute. Let's push it to the bottom. So bottom should be 0. Okay, now let's add padding of 2 rem. Good. Now we need a border top. Okay, we need a border top. Let's do that. So border top, let's use 1 pixel solid, and for the color let's use our gray. So let's use gray 200. Great, and this is actually looking amazing. Okay, for now when you click on this, it does nothing. So we are going to see how we can do that. So for now, we don't want to show this by default. We only want to show this part whenever this particular icon is clicked. And to do this, we need to introduce little JavaScript. Okay, we need to use JavaScript. Remember, your HTML lays the foundation, so it's the structure. As we've seen several times, CSS actually beautifies our web page. Okay, and then anything that requires interactivity, okay, for you to interact with the website, you need JavaScript. Don't worry if you are new to coding. We are only going to add few lines of code to make this work. Okay, we are going to close this, then use JavaScript to display this whenever this icon is clicked. Let's select the list header left and also the header right container, and we are going to set display to none. And for now, let's remove this height. Okay, so we set the height of the header to 100 viewport width. We remove that. We are going to add that style using JavaScript. Okay, so for now, let's continue with this. Let's now select the show menu. Now let's add a class called the show menu. We select the list header left inside this class and also the header right container inside this class, and we are going to set display to flex. For now, we've not added this particular class. Go to the HTML and search for this. You see, we don't have this. There is no any element that has this class. We are going to introduce this class using JavaScript. But for now, in our CSS, let's write this class. So we are saying there is a container that is going to have the class show menu, which actually contains the list header left. So let's go to our HTML so you understand what we are doing. Okay, so here is the list header left. Next, let's now introduce JavaScript so that when we click on this particular icon, we are going to see our navigations. Okay, so back here, so here, let's add another file. So click on this and just type script.js. So in this JavaScript file, the first thing we want to do is actually this element, okay, to have access to the elements we have in our HTML file. Since this video is not on JavaScript, I'm going to use the simplest means, okay, the simplest way possible to achieve these results. For instance, this menu toggle, we can access it just the way we did in the CSS. Remember, in your CSS, you select this particular element using either the class or the ID. So in JavaScript, we also need to select this either by the class or ID, okay? Just the same thing. Now, let's go back here. Now we need to define a variable. A variable is just like a container, okay? Just like a container. Let's call this variable menu toggle. And let this be equal to, we now select that element using documents, okay? So documents basically simply represent these our HTML documents, okay? For now, just see it like this. We don't have to start looking into the DOM in details. But for now, we say document dot. Now we can select this element by its ID by using the get element by ID. Okay, we get element by ID, and here we specify the ID of that element, which is what? Look at the ID we gave, is the menu toggle. Okay, so we put that here, menu toggle. Simple. Now we do the same thing for the close menu. So let's say close menu, and this should be, we can even copy this and put it here and change this to close menu. All right. The next thing we want to access is this header. Okay, this header nav. And remember, we need this nav because by default, you see, we can't see the nav. We want to see it whenever this is clicked. So definitely we need to access this, okay? So here we gave it a class. Let's actually select it using this class. So in our JavaScript file, let's say const header nav, okay? Here we can use documents.querySelector, okay? And for query selector, we select it just exactly the way we do in CSS, okay? Remember to select a class in CSS. You use dots and then you add the class name. That's the same thing you do here, okay? The same thing you do here in JavaScript. Now, let's select the header itself, the header element itself. So that should be, const header should be documents dot query selector. Okay, now because we are selecting the header itself, it's an element. Remember in CSS, let's go back to our style sheet, and here, now look at this. When we selected this header, because we selected this using the element name, so we are selecting by the element name itself. We don't have to use dots. Okay, that's the same thing we did here. Do you see? Note the difference between this and this. Now, this one here, we can do the same thing using query selector. Okay, so we can even change this to query selector. But if we use query selector, we now have to introduce hash here. That means we are selecting by what? By ID. Okay, so I hope you understand this. Let's change it back and use get element by ID for now. So the next thing we are going to do is now to select this menu toggle. Remember, the menu toggle is this, right? We want to add what we call event listener. Okay, so we add an event listener. It's just as simple as listening to an event. By an event, we mean when a user clicks on this or over on this or do whatsoever on this, we call that event in JavaScript. Okay, so in this case, we want to add a click event. You see, we have several types of events. For now, let's use the click event. We now use what we call a callback function. You don't have to worry about this because this is not a JavaScript course. This is simply HTML course. Okay, so next here we need to tell what should happen whenever this particular menu icon is clicked. Okay, and we simply want to show the header nav. So let's grab the header nav. This header nav, which is this here, okay, this header nav, remember it has class. We can add more class, we can remove the class, we can do we can do a whole lot. Okay, so in this case, we want to access the class list. This class list contains the class attached to this particular element. Okay, but in our case, we want to add a class, which is what we added. Remember that class we added in our CSS file, which is the show menu. Okay, so we are going to add this class. Okay, now for now, let's see what happens when we click on this. When you click on this button, for sure, nothing will happen because we are yet to link this JavaScript file with the HTML file. Remember, for the CSS to work, we added the file to our HTML file. Okay, we have to link it up. Okay, and for JavaScript, we do that using what we call the script tag. Okay, we have the script tag, and here we don't have to write anything, but now we need to pass two things. We need to pass the source, and the source here is going to be our script.js. The next thing we need to do is to add this defer. For now, you don't have to bother about this, but what this does is to make sure that our HTML content is already loaded before we apply whatsoever we have in the script file. Okay, so let's see if this works. Let's click on this. Do you see that? That is beautiful. So when we click on this, we see this now. So everything, just look at as simple as this is. See what happened when you click on that. Okay. The next thing we want to do is actually to increase. Remember the header. Remember, we set the header to 100 viewport height on small devices, right? Now let's right? But we removed it and we said we are going to use JavaScript to achieve that. So simply we can grab this header, which is this, okay, which represents the header itself. Okay, this is so nice and very simple. Now let's grab the style, okay, and we want to change the height. Okay, we want to set the height to 100 viewport heights. Great. Now let's click this again. You see, we now have the 100 viewport height. You see, with JavaScript, we can do a whole lot of things. Great. Now, let's now do more, because when we show this, okay, if you look at the finished project, when this is open, the menu toggle, the toggle menu is hidden and we can only see the close menu. So let's do that. So when this is clicked, we also want to select the menu toggle. Okay, now let's access the style and let's set display to be equal to none. As simple as that. So let's click this again. You see, the menu icon is gone. Now let's now select the close menu. We do the same thing, style, and we now set the display to be equal to what? To flex, okay, or block. And when you click this, you see, we now see this. Great. Now, the next thing we want to do is to now add an event listener to this particular close menu so that when we click on this, it displays back the menu icon. Okay, so let's go straight and do that. So here we can add the comment, and here we say, let's show the menu. And finally, we say close the menu. So let's select the close menu and we now add an event listener, and it is going to be the click event. Let's use a callback function. And for this, we simply want to select the header nav. Okay, let's access the class list and we simply remove. Remember, we now remove the class we added. Let's remove this show menu. Now, let's also select the header. We grab the style. We now set the height back to, let's say, 10 viewport height. Okay. And now let's select the menu toggle, the style. Let's set display to be flex. Now let's select the close menu. Then the style, we set display to none. And this actually should be okay. So let's click on this. Okay. And you see, perfect. This is beautiful. So with this, we are done with the JavaScript session. Now, still on the responsive design, let's actually undo the hero section and some other sections on the page. You see, this is not looking nice. This is not looking nice. So let's work on that. So back in our CSS, let's go to our responsive styles. So still inside this particular block, let's now work on the hero section. So here we can simply say hero session, okay? And let's note responsive. So let's select the main content, okay? So first, the space here is actually too much, so we can reduce that. And remember, let's close this header. We are done with this. And this is our subnav. Then we have this class, main content, wrapping every other thing. So let's select this class and let's reduce the padding top. Let's set it to forum. Yeah, this is better. Good. Now let's work on this for the hero container. Okay, so let's look at what we did on the hero container. I think we used CSS grid. So Command F, let's search for this. Okay, we used CSS grid. All we need to do is to change the grid template columns. So let's go back here. We change the grid template columns. Let's set it to 1FR. Perfect. Now we have this. Let's add some space between the image and this particular button. So let's grab the container wrapping the image, hero img. Let's give it some margin top of 4rem. Good. And this looks better. And this section is actually okay. We don't have to stress ourselves. Let's go to the enterprise. Okay, so here, let's copy this. Let's put it here. And we change this to enterprise. Okay, so dot enterprise session. Let's change the grid template columns to 1FR. Good. So now we have this, right? All right. Now let's select the client session. And for now, let's set the display to none. Next, let's work on this Y session, Y Upwork session. Let's change the flex direction to colon. Okay, so now we have this. And we now need to increase the width. Okay, we set the width of this particular div back to 100%, and we do the same thing for the second div. So that should be dot y left. Let's set the width to 100%. Okay, we do the same thing for the y right test. Okay, so now we have this. So let's select the Y right test. Let's change the padding top to 2rem. Now we have this. Great. Now let's work on the footer. This video is becoming so long. Let's quickly complete the footer. So let's select the footer itself and let's change the padding to 1rem. So we basically reduce this space. So let's save this. Okay. Let's select the footer main. Let's set flex wrap to wrap. Let's grab the footer mid. Let's set flex wrap to wrap and let's give it a gap of 2rem. Let's look at how we can access smaller screen devices. For instance, okay, so let's say on iPhone SE, I want to do something different. Okay, so let's actually change this. On iPhone SE, we want this footer to look different. Okay, so let's work on that. And to do that, we now have to leave this particular block. So we can toggle on and on. Let's leave this block. Outside this, let's add another comment. So we can say responsive design for more devices. Okay, and we use the at media. Let's say mass width of 720 pixels. So for now, let's select the body and let's set the background color to red. Save this. Now you see here now we have this red background color. Now if you change this to, let's say, iPad mini, you see we don't have this because the size here is 768 and we are selecting 720. Okay, I hope you understand this. Now let's remove this. And on this screen device, we want to do more on the footer. So let's select the footer main. So let's select the footer main. And for this footer main, let's change the flex direction to colon. So let's change this to iPhone SE, which is 375, very small. Okay, let's go. You see, now we have this. Now let's add some gap. Let's say gap to before rem. Good. We now have this space here, okay, which is looking good already. Now let's undo this part, which is the footer end. Let's change the flex direction to colon. Let's also apply this to the footer last list, okay, dot footer last list, okay, and now we have this. On this device, let's actually hide this image. To do that, let's look at the container wrapping that image. So you see the importance of comments. We can easily read this file. You see how neat it is. So this is the Y Upwork session. We can now search for the image. Okay, this is the image. So let's grab this particular container, Y image. So we say dot Y image. Let's set display to none. Okay, so now we have this. Good. The major goal was to show you how simple it is to make your website responsive. And this ends this particular project. Try and pick just any website and build it on your own. And remember, you can always reach out for help whenever you don't know what to do. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any question on this project, and see you in the next one. Bye.